Okay, let's dive right into our sources today. We've got 8 different articles lined up, covering quite a range. First up, a pretty major administrative change in Bengaluru.
Yeah, this is about the Bruhat Bengaluru Mahanagara Palike, the BBMP. As of May 16th, 2025, it's been replaced by something called the Greater Bengaluru Authority, or GBA.
Right, so why the change? What was wrong with the BBMP?
Well, the core issue really was that the BBMP just wasn't coping. It was set up back in 2007, merging the old city with all the new, rapidly growing areas. But Bengaluru's growth has been explosive,
Hmm.
and managing a city that large, over 10 million people now, with, all these different civic bodies often working in silos, it just led to massive inefficiencies.
Yeah, and the article mentions the things people complain about all the time, doesn't it? The
hmm
traffic, the potholes, flooding, garbage problems, water shortages.
Exactly. That's the everyday experience. A big part of the problem was the lack of coordination. You've got the BDA doing planning, the water board,
Yeah.
Bescom for electricity, the metro, the buses.
All doing their own thing, sort of.
Pretty much. So the GBA is meant to be this unified body, integrated planning, better service delivery, getting everyone pulling in the same direction. Think of it like trying to conduct an orchestra where everyone's playing off different sheet music. The GBA is the conductor.
Okay, so who's in charge of this new GBA? How's it structured?
It's got some serious weight at the top. The chief minister is a chairperson, deputy CM is vice chairperson, and it includes the heads of all those key agencies: BDA, BWSSB, BESCOM, the Metro, BMTC.
Ah, so they're all formally part of it now.
Right. Collaboration is built in.
Yeah.
And there's an administrative officer to manage the transition phase.
So what actually happens to the old BBMP structure? Does it just disappear overnight?
Not quite. It'll stick around temporarily. The plan is to actually break it down into maybe 3 to 5 smaller municipal corporations.
Oh, interesting, like
Yeah.
smaller boroughs.
Exactly. They'll handle the local day-to-day stuff, waste collection, local roads, that kind of thing. But they'll report up to the GBA. It's a bit like the model you see in London or New York, with a strategic authority overseeing local councils.
Makes sense. But that sounds like a tricky transition. What are the immediate challenges?
Oh, absolutely. Making sure essential services don't get disrupted during the handover is, priority number one. And they need to build these new digital platforms for centralizing everything: service requests, complaints, performance monitoring. That digital infrastructure is crucial.
And the reaction. I imagine not everyone's thrilled.
Well, it's mixed, as you'd expect. Supporters say it's long overdue for a city like Bengaluru. But critics, especially opposition parties like the BJP, are raising concerns.
Like what?
Worries about it just adding another layer of bureaucracy, maybe leading to higher taxes without actually improving services, and concerns about too much power being centralized. The government's promising elections for those new, smaller corporations, partly to counter that.
Okay, let's shift gears. Article number 2 tackles a completely different subject. The plan for caste enumeration in the next census in India.
Yeah, this is a really big one, politically and socially. The Modi government wants to include caste data collection, and it sparked a huge debate.
So what's the argument for doing it?
Proponents say it's about social justice. They argue it'll finally give us solid empirical data on the socioeconomic status of OBCs, other backward classes.
Right, the idea being that better data leads to better policy.
Exactly. More targeted affirmative action, stronger justification for welfare programs, and also potentially understanding the inequalities within the OBC category itself, identifying the extremely backward classes, or EBCs.
But the article raises some flags too, doesn't it? It's not just about collecting data.
No, definitely not. One key point is, well, don't overstate what a census alone can do. The Registrar General's job is collecting data, not designing policy.
Yeah.
And there's always the risk of politicizing the census itself.
And it makes a point about history too, that social justice changes haven't always waited for perfect data.
Absolutely. Think about the Mandel Commission, or even the EWS reservation more recently. Those came from political struggle, social mobilization, a kind of moral commitment, not just because a new data set appeared.
The piece also argues that we actually do have quite a bit of data already pointing to caste inequalities.
We do. There's census data for SCs and STs, there are NSSO surveys, the National Family Health Surveys, crime data. Even things like the Bihar Caste Survey and the earlier SECC data highlighted OBC vulnerabilities.
So despite having this data, the article suggests there hasn't been a huge wave of corresponding policy reform, particularly at the national level for OBCs.
That's the core argument, really. Things like better representation in the private sector or top government posts, those haven't materialized in a big way despite the existing data.
So the takeaway is
No.
data is useful, but not enough.
Pretty much. The article argues that political will, the actual intent of the ruling class, is far more critical than just having the numbers. A caste census might give you a better map, but it doesn't guarantee you'll actually take the journey towards social justice.
Okay, moving on to Article 3. This one's about copyright law bumping up against generative AI. A familiar theme lately.
Yeah, copyright law has always had to adapt, right? Printing press, photocopiers, the internet. AI is just the latest and maybe the trickiest challenge.
And the main issue is how these AI models, like the large language models, get trained.
Exactly. They essentially scrape vast amounts of data from the internet to learn, and inevitably a lot of that data is copyrighted material, text, images, code.
Which has led to lawsuits.
Oh yeah. The article mentions cases in India, the Federation of Indian Publishers, Asian News International, suing OpenAI in Delhi. They're saying their work was used for training without permission.
And similar things are happening elsewhere, like the U.S.
Right. In the U.S., you hear arguments about fair use, this idea that you can use the copyrighted material under certain circumstances, like education or commentary. Some AI companies might argue training falls under a kind of fair learning exception.
How does Indian law compare on that front? Is it similar to U.S. fair use?
Not exactly. The Indian Copyright Act uses what's called an enumerated approach. Instead of a broad principle like fair use, it lists specific permitted exceptions.
So if AI training isn't explicitly on that list,
It's potentially harder to argue it's allowed. This could mean Indian law might lean more towards protecting the rights holders compared to the U.S. system. There's a concern this could limit access to information, ironically going against copyright's original purpose of promoting progress.
OpenAI apparently offers an opt-out now, so creators can say, don't use my stuff for future training. But what about the data already used?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? They haven't offered a way to undo the past training, and it raises a huge technical question. Can an AI model even unlearn things? Is that feasible?
This opt-out mechanism could also affect future AI development, couldn't it? Especially in India.
It could. If lots of high-quality Indian content gets opted out, new AI platforms being built here might struggle to get the diverse, rich data they need to be competitive. It could create a disadvantage.
The article also brings up that classic copyright distinction, protecting the expression of an idea, not the idea or information itself.
Right. The argument from the AI side is often, we're learning from the information, the patterns, the style, but we're not directly copying the specific sentences or paragraphs. It's a fine line.
And it draws an interesting parallel between how humans and machines learn.
Yeah, it points out that both learn by absorbing and building on what came before. The law currently doesn't really make a distinction based on whether the learner is human or silicon. It's a really complex area.
Let's shift to Article 4. This talks about AI changing the Indian workplace, moving from a pyramid structure to something called an hourglass model.
Yeah, it's a neat visual, the old pyramid. Lots of workers at the base, a thick layer of middle managers, few leaders at the top.
Right.
The hourglass model suggests leaders are still at the top, but the middle layer gets much thinner, and the base is wider, with workers using AI tools more directly.
What are the potential upsides for India, according to the article?
Big potential for productivity gains. McKinsey estimated maybe up to 25%, which is huge. Also, more efficiency, maybe more flexibility, especially for smaller and medium-sized businesses that can't afford massive management structures.
How does this hourglass thing actually work in practice? What does AI do?
The idea is AI takes over a lot of the routine coordination, maybe some decision-making tasks that middle managers used to handle. This frees up senior leaders to focus on strategy.
So fewer middle managers needed.
Potentially, yes. That layer shrinks, and frontline workers interact more directly with AI systems as part of their job.
Is this happening faster elsewhere? The article mentions Europe and the U.S.?
It seems so. The suggestion is that higher labor costs in those regions make automation a more immediate economic driver. Gartner apparently predicts a big cut in middle management jobs there pretty soon, by 2026.
And India's approach. Is it the same?
It looks more like a hybrid approach here. You see lots of innovation in cities like Bengaluru and Hyderabad, obviously. But India overall ranks a bit lower on AI readiness indexes.
Why is that?
Several factors mentioned. Uneven infrastructure, think about internet access in rural areas, but also cultural factors like a stronger tradition of hierarchy in workplaces.
But Indian companies are using AI, right? Just maybe differently.
Oh, absolutely. Big names like Flipkart, Reliance Jio use it for specific things, predicting trends, optimizing logistics, but they often keep more management layers, maybe because the Indian market is so diverse and complex, and perhaps because of that cultural respect for hierarchy.
Does this hybrid model still offer benefits, though?
Definitely. The article gives examples. A textile maker using AI to predict demand better, reducing waste. Faster coding in tech. More flexibility in pharma, especially highlighted during the pandemic. Better customer service with chatbots. Easier HR with automated payroll. And it creates new jobs, too. AI specialists, data ethicists.
Of course, there are downsides and challenges, too.
Always. Job displacement is a big one, especially for those middle managers or workers with skills that AI can replicate. Then you have the ethical concerns bias creeping into AI from data, lack of transparency. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act is relevant there.
Right, and infrastructure.
Still a challenge, that rural connectivity issue. Plus, potential cultural resistance to flatter, more AI-driven structures.
So what does the article recommend for India moving forward?
Focus on reskilling people for new roles. Adopt that hybrid model that fits the Indian context. Develop clear ethical guidelines. Encourage collaboration to share knowledge. And importantly, view AI adoption as a continuous journey, not a one-off fix.
Okay, Article 5 takes us way out to the Pacific to New Caledonia. It seems talks about its political future have hit a wall.
Yeah, high-stakes talks between France and various local groups trying to work out a new political deal collapsed back on May 8th. It's a place with a very complicated history.
French territory, right, with a history of colonial tensions.
Exactly. French territory since 1853, initially a penal colony. There were near civil war conditions in the 1980s. The 1998 Nouméa Accord was a major step. It acknowledged the trauma faced by the indigenous Kanak people and set up a path towards greater autonomy.
And that path included independence referendums.
3 of them, yes, in 2018, 2020, and 2021. All 3 rejected full independence. However, that last one in 2021 was boycotted by the pro-independence parties, mainly the Kanak and Socialist National Liberation Front, FLNKS, so they don't really accept its result.
Why the continued push for independence after those votes?
It goes back to that history of French seizure and the persistent divisions. Even though colonial rule eased, the FLNKS remains committed to full sovereignty.
The Nouméa Accord did grant quite a bit of autonomy already, though.
It did. They got their own Congress and this unique concept of New Caledonian citizenship, which restricted voting rights in local elections mainly to long-term residents, aiming to protect Kanak political influence.
So what were these recent talks trying to achieve? What was the proposal?
They were aiming for a kind of third way, described as sovereignty and partnership. It involved enhanced international recognition, more local control over things like the judiciary, but with many powers immediately delegated back to France. A complex balancing act.
And that didn't fly.
Nope. The hardline loyalist groups who want to remain fully French rejected it. They saw it as independence in disguise.
Did the Loyalists have their own idea?
They proposed partitioning the territory. Basically, let the pro-independence provinces have some kind of associated status, but keep the Loyalist majority South province fully integrated with France.
Wow. How did that go down?
Badly. France rejected it immediately, saying New Caledonia is indivisible, and the independence movement called it paramount to apartheid, so complete deadlock.
Which leaves things uncertain for the upcoming provincial elections.
Exactly. Those elections are due by November 2025, and now they'll happen without any prior agreement on the territory's long-term future. It really raises the stakes.
Okay, Article 6 brings us back to India and a specific constitutional mechanism. The president referring questions to the Supreme Court under Article 143.
Right, the advisory jurisdiction. It's an interesting power. The article notes it has roots in the old Government of India Act 1935, and Canada has something similar, but the U.S. doesn't because of their strict separation of powers idea.
So how does it work? The president can just ask the Supreme Court for advice?
Essentially, yes, but acting on the advice of the Union Council of Ministers. They can refer a question of law or fact if it's considered of public importance, and when they do, it has to be heard by a bench of at least 5 Supreme Court judges.
Is the court's opinion binding, like a regular judgment?
Technically, no, it's advisory, but it carries immense persuasive weight. Governments and lower courts almost always follow it.
The article mentions some famous past examples of this being used.
Yeah, quite a few landmark cases. Things like the limits of delegated legislation, conflicts between fundamental rights and directive principles, how territory can be transferred, powers of legislatures versus courts, even issues around presidential elections and the collegium system for appointing judges.
Has the court ever refused to give an opinion?
Only once, apparently. That was in the Ramjan Mabumi reference back in 1993. They felt the question wasn't appropriate for advisory opinion.
So what prompted the current reference by President Murmu?
It stems directly from a recent Supreme Court judgment. That judgment laid down specific time limits for governors and the president when they're considering state bills. It also said their decisions, or lack thereof, could be subject to judicial review.
Ah, okay. And the government is questioning that judgment.
Yes. They've posed 14 specific questions to the court. They mostly center on interpreting Articles 200 and 201 of the Constitution, which deal with governors reserving bills for the president's consideration.
What's the core legal question being asked?
Essentially, does the judiciary have the power to impose timelines that aren't explicitly written in the Constitution? And can the actions of governors or the president regarding bills be challenged in court before the bill actually becomes law? Is that justiciable?
The article suggests there's a political dimension to this, too.
Definitely. It points to the ongoing friction between the union government and several opposition-ruled states as a key driver behind these disputes over bill assent. Interestingly, the Supreme Court, in its earlier judgment, had even cited home ministry guidelines regarding timelines for the president.
So this reference is trying to get a definitive answer on these federalism issues.
That seems to be the goal. The article mentions a past reference on the Kaveri dispute, where the court said it couldn't overturn a prior judgment in its advisory role. But this time, the aim seems to be settling these fundamental questions about the balance between the executive, legislature, and judiciary in the context of state legislation.
Right, let's move to Article 7. This one critically examines India's counterterrorism doctrine, especially after the Pahalgam attack in April 2025 and the subsequent Operation Sindoor.
Yeah, it questions this idea of a new normal in counterterrorism, often associated with PM Modi's approach. A key starting point is that in a democracy like India, unlike maybe Pakistan, national security policies should be debated openly in parliament.
It challenges the effectiveness of retaliation as a deterrent, doesn't it?
It does. The logic presented is, if the earlier strikes after Uri in 2016 and Pulwama in 2019 were truly effective deterrents, then why did the Pahalgam attack happen?
Fair point.
And it casts doubt on whether Operation Sindoor, the cross-border strikes, and military escalation actually works as a deterrent. It notes the NIA hasn't caught the Pahalgam attackers, and the identities of many terrorists supposedly killed in Operation Sindoor haven't been confirmed.
The article contrasts this with the response to the 2008 Mumbai attacks.
Right. In Mumbai, most perpetrators were killed or caught, the plot was exposed, linking it to Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Pakistani ISI, and there was significant diplomatic effort to isolate Pakistan. Plus, people like Headley and Rana were eventually prosecuted. It suggests a more complete follow-through.
It also picks up on the Prime Minister's own comments about nuclear blackmail from Pakistan.
Yeah, the argument is that these comments, along with calls for Pakistan to dismantle terror infrastructure, actually highlight the limits of the current doctrine, especially given Pakistan's nuclear status and its deep documented ties between the military establishment and terrorist groups.
Despite those ties, Pakistan still gets international support.
That's a crucial point made. Major powers continue military aid. The author argues real deterrence would involve cutting off that support. It also calls for a clear-eyed cost-benefit look at Operation Sindoor, including the cost in Indian lives, military and civilian, from Pakistani shelling, which hasn't been fully revealed.
There's a point about weapons procurement, too.
Yes, despite the Made in India rhetoric, it notes that many key systems India uses are foreign imports, suggesting arms suppliers are major beneficiaries of the conflict. And the fact the U.S. had to step in to broker a ceasefire after Operation Sindoor is presented as showing limits on India's policy freedom.
And a shift away from pure bilateralism with Pakistan.
Exactly. Nuclearization seems to have led to more international intervention, weakening the old Simla Agreement principle. India's apparent acceptance of U.S. mediation is seen as a significant shift.
So what's the alternative proposed? A strategic reset?
Yes. Exploring engagement with Pakistan, given geopolitical shifts, recognizing terrorism as a global threat. The article argues the current doctrine mirrors the U.S. war on terror, which had limited success, especially against a nuclear-armed state with state-sponsored terror links.
What should the immediate priorities be, according to this analysis?
Focus on the NIA investigation of Pahalgam, bring perpetrators to justice, renew diplomatic efforts to stop international support for Pakistan's military terror complex, and, long-term, supporting civilian democracy in Pakistan is seen as more realistic. Crucially, it calls for a proper parliamentary debate on Operation Sindoor and the whole doctrine.
Okay, our final article, number 8, is quite different. It's about the biological mystery of A to I mRNA editing.
This is really fascinating molecular biology. It happens in animals and fungi. Basically, a specific chemical letter in messenger RNA, adenosine A, gets changed to inosine I.
And that matters because
Because the cell's protein-making machinery, the ribosome, reads that inosine I as if it were guanine G. So you're effectively changing the genetic instruction after it's been copied from the DNA, which can change the final protein product.
the article quotes Dobzhansky. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. How does that fit here?
It frames the central question. Why does this seemingly complicated extra step exist? If you need a G at that position in the protein instructions, why doesn't the DNA just have a G there to begin with? Evolutionarily, what's the point of this editing?
And a study on a fungus, Fusarium graminearum, offers some clues.
It does. Researchers found something really striking. During the fungus's normal growth phase, there was no A to I editing happening. But when it switched to its sexual reproduction stage, suddenly there were over 26,000 sites in the mRNA being edited.
Wow, that's a massive switch.
Huge. They then zoomed in on 71 specific genes called PSC genes. These genes naturally had a premature stop signal, a UAG codon, in their sequence.
Meaning the protein would normally be cut short.
Right. But during sexual reproduction, that UAG stop signal was edited to UGG, which codes for an amino acid, tryptophan. This editing allowed the fungus to make the full-length functional protein.
Okay, so editing is essential for those proteins during sex.
Exactly. When they deleted those PSC genes, it messed up sexual development, proving the editing was crucial.
But there was another twist, wasn't there? About the unedited versions.
Yeah, this is really cool. For 2 of those genes, they found that the original unedited version, the one with the premature stop codon, actually helped the fungus survive environmental stress during its vegetative growth phase.
Ah. So there's a benefit to having the A in the DNA for one stage and a benefit to editing it to I read as G in another stage.
Precisely. It provides a potential evolutionary reason why the DNA hasn't just changed permanently to a G. It allows the fungus to have it both ways, depending on the circumstances, like a genetic switch.
But this only explained a couple of the genes.
Right, only 2 out of the 71 they looked closely at showed this clear dual benefit. The purpose of the editing at the other tens of thousands of sites is still largely a mystery.
So what are the broader ideas about why this exists?
One hypothesis is that maybe, over long evolutionary timescales, more and more genes will evolve to take advantage of this editing system, making it a fundamental part of how gene expression is regulated. It could even allow more G to A mutations to accumulate in the DNA because the editing machinery can effectively fix them at the RNA level.
So we found a function, but maybe not the whole reason it evolved or is maintained so widely.
Exactly. As the researchers say, explaining the overall evolutionary advantage is much harder than just finding specific examples of function. It remains a complex and fascinating puzzle in biology.
Thank you for listening. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. We're always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about.